are in the middle of a series called Outrageous Faith. It's all on the book of Acts, so that's where we're at. I want to start today, and I'm going to tell you a little story, joke. I found this to be probably one of the funniest jokes I've ever told, but you might not even like it. A passenger in a taxi leaned over to the driver to ask him a question, and he was sitting in the back seat. He reached up and touched the man on his shoulder, and the driver screamed out of absolute fear. He lost control of the cab. He nearly hit the bus. He went over a curb, was just inches from running into a plate glass window. A few minutes, everything was silent. The shaking driver said, "Are you okay? I am so sorry, but you scared the daylights out of me." And the passenger said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that a mere tap on your shoulder would actually startle someone so bad." The driver said, No, it's my fault. He said, "This is the first day that I've ever driven an actual taxi." He said, "For the last 25 years, I've driven a hearse." There you go. That was really funny, I thought, could you imagine the fear? Like, who's tapping on my shoulder? All right, today I want to talk about fear. We'll start here with Mr. Max Lucado. Max Lucado has a book on fear. Wish I could remember the name of it. Something fear. He said this: "Fear never wrote a symphony or poem, never negotiated a peace treaty or cured a disease. Fear never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. Fear never saved a marriage or a business. Courage did that. Faith did that. People who refuse to consult or cower to their timidities did that. But fear itself, fear herds us into a prison and slams the door. Wouldn't it be great to walk out? Imagine your life wholly untouched by angst. What if faith, not fear, was your default reaction to threats? If you could hover a fear magnet over your heart and extract every last shaving of dread, insecurity, doubt, what would remain? Envision a day, just one day, absent the dread of failure, rejection, or calamity." I love the way Max Lucado put that. Here's what I was thinking. I want us to imagine that kind of a day. A day when in the middle of the night your phone rings and you know in the middle of the night nothing can come good from what's on the other side of that phone call. But instead of answering it with fear, you actually pick it up in faith, knowing God is going to do something. He's going to be with you no matter what this phone call is all about. Imagine a day when your boss calls you into the office and you know that's never a good thing. But you walk in with faith, knowing, you know what, whatever my boss says, I'm just going to be okay with it because I know God is in it. I want us to imagine a day when you're on that airplane and it starts to just like wobble and you start worrying and becoming so fearful, but then you stop and you say, wait a minute, I don't need to fear because I know God is the one that's holding this plane in the air. How about the day that you look down and you see that bill that you know has to be paid on Friday and you're like, I don't have any money to pay it. And suddenly you're just overcome with an amazing amount of fear. But then you stop and you say, wait a minute, I'm not going to attack this problem with fear. I'm going to attack it with faith. How about when the police show up at your door, you know that nothing ever is good when that happens. But you open the door and you say, wait a minute, whatever this police officer is about ready to tell me, I'm going to handle this with faith. And then for those of you, and you've been through this in the last 6 months, when you walk into the doctor and he sits across from you and he said, I'm so sorry to tell you. And you know before he even tells you what the problem is, that you just smile. You say, you know what, I'm not going to be fearful. I'm handling this with every ounce of faith because I know my God, and I know that nothing happens in my life that is out of his control. To me, that sounds like a perfect way to live. Here you go. A way that live knowing this, knowing God so well and knowing he has a plan and will get you through anything. But here's what I realized about fear. It's a really funny thing. In the moment, here you go, before faith has a chance to kick in. Always remember that. Before faith has a chance to kick in, because that's what we want to happen. There's always this sudden fear of terror, regardless of whether the phone in the middle of the night or the policeman at the doorstep. There's that moment where you just feel everything in your body goes numb. I had that happen a few times. Cheyenne called probably about 6 months ago. We're just chatting after work, and all of a sudden she starts screaming. They hit me, and then the phone goes dead. Okay, serious, Cheyenne? Like, what are you thinking, But it's that moment where you just, not everything just, your whole world just like crashes in your body at that moment. It's that one moment when Rob will bring a bill in and he'll be like, hey, we have this bill from this attorney. I forgot to give it to you. And I'm like, we don't need money to pay it. It's that, you start panicking over that. It was the moment when my dad was in the hospital and the doctor came in and said, you know what? Nothing really went as planned. And it's those moments that you just feel so, everything in your body just goes bad. And I understand that because those are feelings that God has given us. And just so you know that, they really are natural feelings. But here's our problem and my question. Are you going to stay there? And that's what we have to ask in class today, because if that's where you're going to stay, that's when fear becomes your prison. And I want us to not live in the prison of fear. I was reading an article this week on El Chapo, the drug lord who's they finally caught and arrested. And he is actually, they're going to put him in solitary confinement, most likely in a Colorado supermax prison. And they said this prison is basically the closest thing to hell on earth. And the reason for it, it's 12 foot by 7 foot, a toilet and a bed, and he will spend 23 hours a day in that room with no human contact, all by himself. And he has one teeny tiny little porthole window that he can just peek out of. That's it. And I started thinking about that, and I thought, you know what? That's what faith does to us. It locks us in this prison where we can't even peek out enough to see that there's this big faith picture of something that God's doing in your life. We tend to forget that. When we're in our prison, we can only see the bed and the toilet and what's in there with us. I want us to remember that if you and I can meet our problems with faith, it's faith in what? Faith in this. Faith knowing that God will walk through with me anything that happens. Anything. If that phone call had turned tragic with Cheyenne, I'll tell you what, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God would have gotten me through it. Would it have been difficult? Absolutely. But we don't have to fear because we know that God, no matter what happens in my life, you're going to walk with me right through this. Some people are sick and they're dying, and it's like there's so much fear in that. And I'm like, there's no fear when you know where you're going to go when you die. There really isn't. There doesn't need to be. See, you and I can have faith in a God that we know is so big and so sovereignly in control of everything on this earth. I want us to have that, a faith that says this: who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, sword. We can add your own thing: sickness, doctors, loss of job, financial issues. My husband's very ill. Like, add what? Can any of those things separate you from the love of Christ? And the answer is no. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. See, we have to learn to be able to Tom Schrader used to always say this: what you know has to trump what you feel. Everything that you know about God has to override how you feel about things. I got an email yesterday from someone. I asked her if I could share this. When she found out that we were talking on fear, this is what she wrote me. She said, Lisa, this is exactly where we are right now. The cancer treatment following my husband's surgery is not available. There is a worldwide shortage. His cancer is very aggressive, and this one drug is the drug he needs to prevent a recurrence. But you know what? The surgeon got all the tumor, and God is our great physician and healer. He is in charge, not the doctor or the drug company. Worry or fear will not add 1 second to my husband's life. His name is written in the book of life, and we will trust Jesus as in John 10:10. We will slip our hands into his nail-scarred hands and walk where he leads, joyfully, because as Paul noted, to die is gain. But while we are here, we will live a full, God-filled life. See, that's a great attitude. It's a great attitude to have when your world seems to be crumbling and falling apart. It just becomes all about him. And see, that's what I want us to focus on today. If we can get to that point, then you will never have to fear another day in your life. It's really honestly as simple as that. I know I told you this joke before, but it seemed to fit. A woman went into a doctor's office. She was seeing one of the new younger doctors, and after about 4 minutes, she came out screaming in fear, running down the hall. The other older doctor went up to her and stopped her and asked her what was wrong, and she told him. He goes back into the younger doctor as he was sitting there writing on his little tablet, and he said, "What are you thinking? Why in the world would you tell 63-year-old Mrs. Terry, a mother of 7, a grandmother of 12, why would you tell her that she's pregnant?" He goes, "Well, it cured her hiccups, didn't it?" Yep, there you go. Could you imagine if someone did that? Like, oh, if someone told me that right now, yeah, terror would be the first thing. But here's what I realize is that the disciples, think about this, the disciples, the guys who hung out with Jesus for 3 years, they had to learn to deal with fear just like you and I did. It's amazing to me. We see this in Matthew 8:23. They're with Jesus on a boat in the Sea of Galilee. Look at this. Now, when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And suddenly, a great tempest arose on the sea, so that the boat was covered with waves, but Jesus was asleep. You're like, what? But I want you to think about that. Jesus gets into a boat, and the disciples followed him. Now, you and I would assume that if we get in a boat with Jesus, then Jesus is going to make it just smooth sailing and no problems and no issues. That's just what we assume. But what we need to realize is that's not reality and that's not life. And suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea. And when it says that, the word for it is this like mega storm. It's not even just a little, the waves are, this is a crashing wave. And we get to the point sometimes where we think, you know what? I'm following Jesus, and I'm a good follower, and I go to church, and I throw some money in the offering plate, and I go to Bible study, and I read my Bible. I'm a good follower. I should never have storms. And somehow we equate the two and think that that's the truth when in essence, it really isn't. And we see it right here. Jesus is in the boat and a megastorm arrives. Here's what we need to know. Great storms force us to see God for who he is. Great storms, whatever storm you are facing in your life, we got to look at it like not a bad thing, but a good thing. Because every time you and I have something major happening in our life, this is a storm, what it does, it should turn our focus on him and say, God, you are great. You can handle this for me. You can do this for me. But God, even if you don't, I'm still going to believe and trust you. It doesn't really matter. But what it does is it forces us into seeing God for who he really is. But when we focus on him, here's what happens. Fear diminishes and faith increases. But honestly, I think that's something that has to be learned. Even the disciples had to learn that. A storm arises and Jesus is sleeping. There was a man sports fishing off the Florida coast. He was a tourist and he capsized his boat and he looked around and he was terrified because he knew there was alligators in the water. So he clung to the boat because he was so fearful of these gators. So he sees an old beachcomber standing on the shore and the tourist shouts and said, "Are there gators in here?" And the man shouted back and says, "Nope, they ain't been here for years." Feeling safe, he loses, the boat and starts swimming toward the shore. Halfway there, he said, he yells out to the man, he said, "How'd you get rid of all those gators?" And the man said, "Well, we didn't do nothing. The sharks got them." Whole new set of fear going on there right then. But some of you are honestly in the midst of a storm. And you're just like the disciples in the boat, and you're like, "Hello, Jesus, do you not see what's going on here? Do you not see what my child is doing? Do you not see what's coming, just came in the mail for me? Do you not see," here you go for some of you, "the cancer cells forming in my body? Do you not see that?" And then a bigger question is, okay, God, if you do, what are you doing about it? Apparently nothing. Why aren't you helping me with this? And that's kind of where we find the disciples. They're like his disciples came and woke him up saying, "Save us. We're perishing. Do something. Make this better." And what's so interesting about this is what happens with fear is this. Fear causes doubt. Fear causes doubt that God actually remotely cares about us. About 20 years ago, we had two things that happened. my husband started a billboard company many, many years ago. We had all these billboards, but he was friends with a finance company, and he knew we could get more billboards if we financed some of them. So he went to get financing, and he got turned down. And it was so shocking and so we didn't know what we were going to do. And fear struck our body because this is how we made our money. And we knew we needed that loan to continue. And the first reaction was that. God, where are you? Do you not love us? Do you not care for us? Do you not see what's going on? Do you not know we need an income? Do you not, God, what do you do? And we doubt his love for us. And then the second thing happened about 20 years ago. This is kind of funny, but not really. I was sitting on the laundry room floor, and I was folding clothes. The kids were little at the time, and I felt like I was sitting on a rock. But actually what it was, right here on my little hind end, or big hind end, the way that's going, I decided the other day, I was telling you about my brownie diet. Well, I was losing weight on my brownie diet, which isn't really anything. But then I decided to eat normal and still stay on my brownie diet, okay? Not working, just FYI on that. So anyway, I had a lump back here. And I was like, what is that? And I'm telling you what, the fear that took over my life was beyond anything. I was like, what if I have cancer? And what if I die? And then Rob has to raise all these little kids on his own. And then what if they have a wicked stepmother? And you just go out right. I've seen Cinderella too many times, okay? And you go, I can't do this, God. And my whole body was just taken over. Because here's why. I never learned how to have faith. I never learned how to face the bad things in my life with faith. And so what happened is I lived in, like I say, El Chapo's prison of fear. Here's what I've learned. I've learned that God has sent me through storms like that to show me something. To show me that it doesn't matter what happens on this earth, that God is faithful. But here's the thing. A lot of times he does things differently than you and I expect. And we got to go into this knowing that. Because if we're going in with faith, like God's going to heal me and God's going to make me better and God's going to do this, and yes, we should have faith, but sometimes God doesn't do that. And we have to learn to come under what he wants versus what we want. And the reason why we're so fearful sometimes is because we forget that. That's what builds faith and diminishes fear. When we can actually focus on him and not what I'm fearful about. Which is why you and I need to do this, and this is hard. We need to embrace the storm. For some of you, you're fighting what your husband's doing. You're fighting the cancer, which you should fight cancer, but you're fighting God. And instead, we need to embrace the storm and say, all right, God, here's the deal. I'm not going to be afraid because I know you know what's going on. And I'm going to trust you because I believe full-heartedly that you have a plan for what is going on in my life. And I think the disciples were just like us. They had to learn that. What's amazing to me is these disciples spent 3 years with Jesus. They just got into a boat with a man who did what? Healed people, made the lame to run and the blind to see and the deaf to hear. Like they just witnessed him with all of this power. But they were still fearful. They saw him feed, 5 to 15 to 20,000 people miraculously. And yet they still feared. They saw demons that Jesus sent packing. And yet they were still fearful. Their first response was fear. God, we're dying. Do you not see the storm? Help me. And look what Jesus says. But why are you fearful? Oh, you have little faith. What is the problem here? Do you not know that I control all of this? Here's what we need to know. Faith can't be learned without storms. The disciples had to go through a storm to see how powerful and mighty that God was, to realize that God would be with them through the tragedy or the heartache. They had to know that. Here brought out a whole different kind of fear. So the men marveled, saying, who can this be that even the winds and the sea obey him? In other words, they look around and said, why are we afraid? We have God in our boat. We have this. The one who controls the storm and the winds and the waves is in the boat with us. Now, I want you to really think about that for yourself. The one who controls whatever storm you're going through, if you're a follower of Jesus, lives in you. He's not even just in a boat. He's literally living in with you. And if he's living in with you, what in the world do we need to fear? He's right there. Our problem is we just want Jesus to make the storm better. We just want him to heal us and make our life just back to where it used to be. But you know what? He might not. We got to get that. We got to get that God is so big he can. Sometimes I was talking to my sister the other day. She had a really bad back. She had a really bad back problem. She could hardly get in and out of bed. And then on top of that, she did Pilates. Bad. Anyone who works out, it's just, I'm telling you, it's bad for you. That's my theory on life. I always say, how did you get hurt? I was working out. There you go. I fell off my treadmill. Okay, yeah, don't go on a treadmill. But she was taking a Pilates class, and I don't know what she did to her foot, but she could hardly walk. She was in a boot. Like, it was this whole big thing. But she goes, Lisa, I've been praying for God to heal me, and he hasn't. And I said to her, you know what? I don't know how to answer that. Because I know he can. Sometimes he does, but oftentimes he doesn't. Here's what I learned. Sometimes God calms the storm, and sometimes he lets the storm rage and calms his child. And we got to really understand that sometimes he's not going to take our sickness away, but you know what? He's going to be with us and comfort us through it. He's not going to take Sherilyn and Bob's tragic loss of their second child last week. But I'll tell you what, I've never seen her so comforted in all my life. Like, she just said, God, I just could never do this without you. There's something about his presence when bad things happen. That's the Christian life. It's just filled with storms. And how we get over fear is facing our storms like this, going, hey, God, I'm trusting you no matter what. When we can get to that point in our life where we're going, no matter what, healing, not healing, married, divorced, whatever it is in your life, when we can get to that point, it'll change our life. I've told you this probably a million times. It's a great illustration. I'm going to use it again because it works here. But I told you about the early American Indians and how they trained their braves. I know we've talked about this, but on the boy's 13th birthday, after he was taught, hunting and fishing and scouting, they put him to one final test. And what they did is they blindfolded him, and they would take him out into the middle of a dense forest, and they would leave him there. They'd say bye, and then they would leave, and he would take off his blindfold, and he would be all by himself. The first time he's ever been away from the tribe, away from his family, away from his mommy, is my thinking. But he was so fearful. He's like 12, 13. Every time he hears a twig snap, he's convinced that it's a wild animal coming to get him. He's all alone, dark, night. You can just imagine the fear in him. But after what seemed like an eternity, dawn would break and the first rays of sunlight would come in, and he'd look around and he'd see flowers and trees, and he saw this outline of a path. And to his utter astonishment, he beheld a figure standing just a few feet away, armed with a bow and arrow. And he realized it was his father and that he had been there all night long watching him. Now, when I read that, it just reminds me that that's how we overcome fear. He didn't know he was fearful because he didn't think anyone was there. You and I, on the other hand, we have the living God living within us. He's here. He's with us. There's nothing we need to fear. I think the other thing, too, I was thinking about this. Another key to figuring out how to deal with fear is this. When you and I can start loving the world less and loving Jesus more, and when we can start living for me less and living for Jesus more, I think our fear will go away. And I worked through that this week, and I thought, why is that? And I thought about the disciples. Think about the scene we just saw. They're in the boat. They're scared. Everything the disciples did, they were scared. Peter, they run when Jesus gets crucified. Peter pretends like he doesn't know Jesus. These are very, very fearful men. That's how they started out. Because what? They kind of love the world, and they love themselves. But the more they came to love Jesus and understand their purpose in this life and stopped caring about themselves, everything changed. They were the most fearless people that you can imagine in the Bible. Every one of those disciples that ran from Jesus when he got arrested, you know what? They all except John died a martyr's death. And these weren't even easy martyrdom, okay? This is bad ways to die. I think one of them got thrown off the temple, and some were beheaded, and Peter was crucified, most people believe, upside down on a cross. I mean, imagine how horrifying that would be. But you know what? By the time they got to that place in their life, they were like, bring it on. I'm not fearful of anything. Why? Because they spent more of their time loving Jesus and knowing him. And when you get to that point, then it's like, I don't really worry too much about what goes on here. See, I understand fear. When the kids were younger, and I know I've told you this before, I used to be always afraid that Rob was out of town, somebody would come in, grab my children, and murder them in front of me. Now, that's horrible. I watch a lot of Dateline. That's a problem in my life. But I was so afraid of that. And I couldn't sleep, and I was sick, and it was just horrible. I had nowhere to take that fear to. I used to always be afraid. Rob would be like, we need to get away, just the two of us. Get away from the kids for a while. I'm like, okay, I know we need that for our marriage, but what if? What if the kids, what if she leaves the gate to the pool open, and what if the babysitters are watching and they drown? And I mean, this just goes on. And you've been there. You know that. That's just the way it is. We're so fearful. I realized that, once again, I lived in El Chapo's prison. And the reason why I was there is because I could not open that little tiny porthole and see that God was there and had a reason and a purpose for everything. Here's what happened. Earthly things kept me in fear. See, when you and I focus everything in our life on earthly things, the things that are in front of us, the things that are around us, of course we're going to fear. We have no control over any of those things. But then what changed in my life over the last 20 years is this. I opened my Bible. As weird as that sounds, I opened my Bible and read from Genesis to Revelation and suddenly saw this huge picture. And our life here on earth isn't about the earthly things. It really is about us serving God and loving him and bringing people to Jesus. And we have a purpose that's different than just an earthly purpose. And what happened is I saw that, I realized, oh my gosh, there's thousands and thousands of years here. I'm not going to be here that long. We have a very short lifespan. And my question became to me is, what is my purpose? What's my purpose here on this life? And when I realized it had to change to eternal things and not earthly things, my fear went away. And I know that sounds really weird, but it's just kind of the way it happens. I realized this, when bad things happen that I used to fear, I just automatically know God is doing something. When heartache happens that I used to be so afraid would happen, I know God is somehow protecting me. When tragedy happens that I used to be afraid of, I just know God wants to use my story. And the same for all of you. He wants to use your story, whatever fearful thing that you're afraid of has come to pass. Don't let it go to waste. I think it was John Piper. Was it John Piper? His wife died. Maybe it wasn't Piper. And he said, don't waste your cancer. Is it Piper? Don't waste them. Let God use them. That's the whole point. And you say, what? For my purpose in life is to point people to Jesus. That's just what it is. And so what happened is when my focus began on this overarching plan for my life, God's plan, I don't have much room for fear. I don't let it have a home any longer. Sometimes I'll let it rent, okay? I let it pay rent for just a little while, but then I kick them out, kick the fear out. I don't let them live in my house any longer. This is how I know what's changed. You know what's weird? And some of you are going to think this is really odd. I'll tell you what I'm afraid of. First, I'll tell you what I'm not afraid of. I'm not afraid that my kids are going to die. That was a huge fear in my life. I'm not afraid that my grandkids and my kids are going to die any longer. The fear is completely gone. And I think the reason for that is because I know they love Jesus. I know I'll see them. And if they die, I know I'm right behind them, okay? I'm not afraid my parents will die. I'm just not. They love Jesus. I know, same thing. I'm right behind you, Mom and Dad. I'm just not fearful of that. I'm not afraid Rob will die. As tragic and horrible as that would be, I know where he's going, and I know God will take care of me. I'm not afraid I will die. Some people are always worried, like, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to get sick. I'm afraid I'm going to die. That's the least of my worry. I'm like, bye-bye world. That's kind of how I feel about this. But I'm not even afraid that I'll get sick. I was talking to Vicki this morning about this, and we were talking about fear and cancer, because she had cancer before. And I said, I wouldn't be afraid of getting sick. I'm afraid of a needle. That's my biggest fear, like that I would have to have a needle stuck in my arm. Like, forget that I have everything else bad going on, but it's the needle that scares me. I just saw the other day, I was watching on the news, and they had this new needle patch thing. I don't know if you saw it. It's little micro needles, and they just put a little patch on you, and you don't feel that big old needle. I'm thinking, I'm in on that. Sign me up for that. But that's what's coming down the pike. But I'm telling you, I'm not worried about those things. But you know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of getting older and losing my mind. Now, as weird as that sounds, but not for the reasons you think, I'm afraid if I lose my mind, I have to stop doing this. And if I stop doing this, then I can't study, and I can't learn, and I can't share Jesus with people, and I can't help people grow in their faith. That is what terrifies me. I realize I don't have a lot of time on this earth. And the time that I do have, I need to spend focusing on eternity and getting other people into eternity with us. That is my greatest fear. The rest of those things that used to cause me terror, like the heartaches and the financial issues and the work issues and the kid issues, I realize they're just fleeting. They're just temporary. They just really are. I have come to realize that no matter what happens in my life, God will get me through it. So here's a couple things I've learned. Fear comes from a lack of knowledge about and trust in this big, powerful God. If you are one that does not read your Bible and you haven't spent any time getting to know him, you are going to fear, and you are going to be very, very fearful. But the more you get to know him and how big he is and how he can do far greater things than you could ever even imagine, a God that you're like, my husband doesn't love me and wants a divorce. Well, you know what? You can't control that. But God can. And he can make your husband love you. See, he's that big. The things you're fearful you can't get that job. Well, you know what? God can get that job for you. You're fearful that you can't get healed. Well, he can really heal you. But see, we fear so many things because we can't control them. But we don't have to fear when we suddenly take all of our fears and we put them onto God. And we say, God, you're big, and I know you love me, and I know you have a plan. And when you get that, it's like, oh, well, this is a simple place to live on this earth. Here's the second one. Fear comes from not knowing your purpose in life. I'm telling you what, so many people are fearful of this life because they have no purpose. They get up in the morning and they have breakfast, and then they go to work, and then they come home and clean the house, and then have dinner, and then go to bed, and then they do it all over again the next day. And they walk around going, what am I living for? Why am I even here? Some people are retired. They get up and they go, eat, and then they go play pickleball, or they play golf, or whatever you guys play. They work out or do weird things like that. But that's what happens. It's like they go and do all those things, and they come home and they eat lunch with their friends, which is, all these things are good. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying, at some point, that's boring. I know that sounds dumb, but if you're not doing something with a purpose for eternity for people, like, here's the deal. When you understand your purpose, then you can wake up in the morning and go to work. And you're like, I'm so excited to go to work because there's people in my office that need to know Jesus. For those of you that play pickleball or golf or whatever you do, I'm going to go today. I'm going to look around, see who I can bless today, who I can talk about, who I can hand a book to. See, that's what happens. We need purpose in our life, and so often we are fearful because there is just no purpose. Here's the third one. Fear comes when we try to hold on to earthly things that will eventually go away. I say, so we hang on to our kids, our spouse, our hobbies, our jobs, our houses, everything. Jesus says this: seek first me and my kingdom, and everything else will just fall into place. It's just really simple. We seek him first, the fear goes away. It just does. I don't know how to explain that, but it just kind of does. And then here, fear comes from thinking God has forgotten us. Now, all of that, and we have 20 minutes left to actually talk about Acts, because I don't know why that is. That was a huge, whatever it's called, introduction. But here's the thing. Fear comes from thinking God has forgotten us. I don't know why in the world the Apostle Paul does not think that God has forgotten him. That man went through more things than you and I will ever go through in our entire life. Think about it. He was, what happened with Paul? It would be nice if I could find my notes. He was abandoned. He was beaten. He was like near-death experience. People hated him. He was persecuted for his faith. He was shipwrecked. There was pain all around him. He was cold. On top of that, it was all the whiny people from the church. Okay, all of this on him. I don't know why he didn't just stop and say, God, I'm fearful of everything because I think you've forgotten me. He never, ever did. He never was fearful, and I think it's because of this. We have to live with God always at the forefront. And I think for Paul, he lived like that. It was all about Jesus, and when it's all about Jesus, honestly, there isn't much to be fearful of. A man who had undergone a very complicated operation, he became fearful because he had an intestine operation, but his head hurt, and he couldn't figure out why that was, so he went to the nurse, and he said, I don't know why I have these headaches, and he was afraid that maybe something was wrong with him. And so she didn't know. She thought maybe he was in post-operative shock, so she went to the doctor and spoke to him. The doctor assured him and said, no, don't worry. He really does have a bump on his head. Because about halfway through the operation, we ran out of anesthetic. So they hit him on the head. Okay, sorry. I don't know why I thought that was funny. Okay, are you guys freezing cold? Did someone tell him to turn it off down there? Anyone do that? Do you think we should? Are you okay? I can't tell. Some of you are like, so I don't know what that means. You're good? All right. If you're cold, someone needs to just go tell them. There you go. Other than that, I'm moving on. Acts 18. Let's pick it up really quick. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth. Paul, remember, left Athens last week. We talked about Athens. He was there. He saw all the gods and the unknown God, and he preached there. His whole place he wanted to get to was Corinth. Corinth was a city filled with idolatry, sexual immorality, thriving commercial center. Paul walks in, and of course, the first thing he sees is, this is a town that needs Jesus. That's just where Paul's mind goes to. There he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. We know Priscilla and Aquila, we always talk about them. Because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome, he came to them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. Now, that's a weird verse. Now think about that. Paul, the great apostle Paul, teacher, traveler, missionary, someone who wrote probably, 13 odd books of the Bible, and he's working as a tent maker, a 9-to-5 job. You're like, why does that seem so odd? But here's what I was thinking. Paul walks into Corinth and looks around and says, uh-oh, there's a big mission field here, but I don't have any money. How am I going to support myself so that I have food in my body so I can go out and share the gospel? I don't have any money. How can I start a church? And you can imagine the fear that could have come upon him. But he didn't fear. He just said, hey, God, here's the deal. I'm going to do my part. You do your part. You want me to build this church? I'm going to go to work. You bring the people. We're all good to go. I think that's what you and I need to know, that God works with us. And sometimes we have to do our part. Here's Proverbs 21:31. The horse is prepared for the day of battle, but deliverance is of the Lord. Paul knew this. He's like, you know what, God, I'm going to prepare. I'm going to work. I'm going to try to meet people. I'm going to try to share you. But you know what? You're going to have to bring a revival into Corinth. That's not my problem. That's your problem, God. So I'm going to do my part, and you do yours. I was thinking, Rob goes to work every day because he knows he needs a paycheck. I study every day because I know I have to do this. Dusty goes to school because he knows he needs to get a degree. Our house is on the market because we need to sell it. But we have to do things in order. Rob has to actually get out of bed and go. I have to actually go pick up my Bible and study. Dusty has to take tests and study, and we have to put our house on the market. Like, we have to work together with God to get things done. And what we have to know is that we do what we can, and God does the rest, because here's what we learn. Any kind of deliverance is from the Lord. See, I can study, and I can teach, and I can do this, but I can't make you show up. In fact, I'm always shocked when anyone does show up. Like, really? Because I know it's not me, and it's probably the stupid jokes. It's probably what it is. But the whole point is that I just do what I do, and God does the rest. He puts it on your heart to go to Bible study today. He puts it on people's hearts. I hear from people all the time. I was flipping through the App Store and I came across your app, and God has changed my life. Well, I can't orchestrate that. Deliverance is from the Lord. And we got to know that. It's like Dusty. He really wants to graduate and go into medical school. Well, I don't know if he can do it. He can study for it, but that's God's deal, to open and close those doors. We can't sell our house. Rob can talk to people and we can put it on the market. But you know what? God has a perfect buyer for our house. I don't know who that is. I don't even know when it is. But I trust that deliverance is from the Lord. See how that works? It just works that way. But here's the problem. It's not even a problem. This is the good part. We aren't fearful. And I don't think Paul was either. He walks into Corinth and he says, this is a big project, God, but you're going to have to do your part and I'm going to do my part. And that's why we don't have to fear. It actually brings peace, not panic, when we can start focusing on God to deliver us instead of ourselves. Here's what you do need to know is that if you're sitting around eating bonbons and watching soap operas and playing videos 6 hours a day and saying, God, I just need you to support me, Paul gives us a little insight that God expects us to do something. And if you're like, well, Lisa, I can't go out and work, I'm like, awesome. God promises to take care of you, but don't sit around and eat bonbons and watch soap operas and play video games. Go do something. Go get involved with people. Christine, the little girl who was here, who flew in from Washington, she and her husband came that one time. Anyway, she ended up having to move to a new city. And she said, Lisa, I know you keep talking about that we have gifts and we're supposed to do something. And she goes, I didn't know what to do. So it dawned on me the other day, I can make cookies and spaghetti. So she said, I made cookies and spaghetti and started handing them out to people. And she wrote me a little note that someone had written her, thank you so much for the yummy, And I'm like, there you go. Do something for God. I mean, that's kind of what our job is. And we just have to know that. God works with us. He doesn't do everything for us. Now, Paul is getting a job, and I say this, I don't think he got a job just to make money. I think it was so he could meet people. And because he knew that people were the point to making money and getting people to know Jesus. Paul wasn't fearful, I think, because his trust was in God to build this. It's God's job to do this. Here you go, Paul. He reasoned, so he worked during the day, and then he did this. He reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, persuaded both Jews and Greeks, and when Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. But when they opposed him and blasphemed him, he shook his garments and said, your blood be on your own heads. I am clean, for now I will go to the Gentiles. This is a really big point that some of you really need to get today. I think at this point, Paul said, I've told you over and over and over about Jesus, and you absolutely refuse to listen. It doesn't penetrate your heart. It doesn't penetrate anything. I'm done. I'm done. I'm walking away. I'm going to go to somebody else, and this is on you. It's not on me anymore. I've told you about Jesus, and it's your responsibility to believe or not believe. Now, the reason why I say that is because there's this really fine line with a lot of us, like Paul. Do I say, I'm done talking to my Mormon cousins? Do I say I'm done talking to the Jehovah's Witnesses out here? Do I say, at what point are you done talking to your family members that really don't want anything to do with Christ? I think this is a good idea from Paul. You'll know when it's time to do what Paul just did. Say, I'm done. I've done everything I could possibly do. I've shared with you, and you're not listening. Matthew 7:6, Jesus says this, do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. He's saying, think about this. If you give pearls, beautiful, expensive pearls, and you throw them into a pig pen, they're just going to trample on them and get them all muddy. They don't care. And Jesus says that's what happens with people when you share the gospel. You're giving something holy to them, but you know what? Don't do it anymore. You're just casting your pearls before swine, and they're not listening. So you have my permission to move on. Jesus said this, whoever will not receive you nor hear your words when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. And the only reason why I'm saying that is because I don't know when to stop. I don't know when I should stop with my Mormon cousins and just say enough's enough. I don't know. But I do think you'll know that when that happens. And for Paul, this is where he's at. All done. Told you. Now we're moving on. Verse 7. And he departed from there and entered the house of a certain man named Justus, who worshiped God, whose house was next door to the synagogue. When Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all of his household, and many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed and were baptized. Now, we're going to see something in the next verse that actually shocked me. And it tells me that Paul actually was fearful. And you're like, what could possibly Paul be fearful of? Look at this. Oh, go back. What room? Then the Lord, verse 9, now the Lord spoke to Paul in the night by vision. Do not be afraid. You're like, Paul, do not be afraid. What could he possibly be afraid of? There you go. Speak, Paul. Don't keep silent. Stuart Briscoe tells a story when he was praying with one of his children at bedtime. He said, do you have any problems at school? And his little son said, no. And Stuart said, well, don't kids give you a hard time because you're a Christian? The son goes, no. And thinking back, Stuart, to his own traumatic childhood days when he told people he was a Christian, he said, but kids always give you a hard time when you talk about your faith. And the little boy just looked at his dad and said, yeah. And that's the reason why I don't ever talk about it. I don't let him know. Because if I don't let him know, then nothing bad ever happens to me. And his son rolled over and went to sleep. He was fine with that. See, I don't know what would have made Paul fearful. And maybe it was that I'm just done talking about him. I don't know. I really honestly don't know. But he was afraid and he was keeping silent. I think maybe he was tired of being beaten every time he opened up his mouth. Maybe he was tired of being whipped and thrown into prison, and maybe his body was aging, and maybe he's just like, you know what, I just can't take one more thing in my life with someone hitting me. I just can't do it anymore. But Jesus comes to him and says, Paul, stop it. Do not be afraid. Do not be fearful anymore. Why? I'm with you. And no one will attack you to hurt you. He must have been fearful of that. Isn't that interesting? The Apostle Paul, fearful that someone is going to hurt him. He says, for I have many people in this city. Paul, don't be afraid. I've got this. I've got your back on this. There's no reason for you to be fearful. We're going to read a little story here. Moody said this. He wrote a story. A young man enlisted, sent back to his regiment. The first night he was in his barracks with about 15 other young men who passed the time playing cards and gambling. Before retiring, he fell on his knees and prayed, and they began to curse him and jeer at him and throw boots at him. So it went on the next night and the next, and finally the young man went and told the chaplain what had taken place. Ask what he should do. Well, said the chaplain, you're not at home now, and other men have just as much right to the barracks as you have. It makes them mad to hear you pray. And the Lord will hear you just as well if you say your prayers in bed and don't provoke them. So for weeks after, the chaplain did not see the young man again, but one day he met him and he said, hey, by the way, did you take my advice? The soldier said, well, I did for 2 or 3 nights. He said, well, how'd that work? Well, I felt like a whipped hound. And the third night I got out of bed, knelt down, and prayed. Well, asked the chaplain, how'd that work? The young soldier said, well, we have a prayer meeting there now every night. 3 have been converted. We're praying for the rest. So he said, my friends, I am so tired of weak Christianity. Let us be out and out for Christ. Let us give no uncertain sound. If the world wants to call us fools, then let them to it. It's only a little while. The crowning day is coming. Thank God for the privilege we have of confessing Christ. See, I think most of us are like maybe Paul was. I'm just afraid. I don't want to tell anyone about Jesus. Like, we don't want to do that. It's scary. I get this. And some of us are the reason why is you say, well, I'm afraid I don't know enough. But what if they ask me a question and I don't know what to answer? Here's my thought to that. I've told you a million times, if you've never seen The Greatest Showman, you need to go see it. It's not even out anymore. Rent it. I think it's one of the greatest movies of all time. I went out and told every person to go see it. People I didn't even know. I'm standing in the movie theater in the line to get popcorn. And I turn around and say, what movie are you going to go see? They're like, oh, I'm going to see this other movie. No, cancel your movie. You got to go see The Greatest Showman. Greatest movie on this entire earth. And I, in the bathroom, hey, what movie are you going to go see? No, honestly, it's probably made $1 million and I should get credit for it, okay? Because I think this was the greatest movie. But here's the deal. I don't know everything about it. I don't know all the details. I don't know the names of all the actors and the actresses. I really don't. I don't know where it was filmed. I don't even know how it was filmed. Are they lip syncing? Are they not? How do you do that? I don't know. I just know one thing. That movie brought me 2 hours of smiles. It just did. I don't know why. So I told everyone I knew. Here's the thing. You don't have to know if dinosaurs were on the ark. Okay, you really don't. You don't even have to know why God allows bad things. I don't know the answer to that. You shouldn't have to know that either. I don't know why God created scorpions and snakes. I don't know. You just need to know this. I don't know. I was spiritually blind on my way to hell. Now I can see I'm on my way to heaven. Thank you, Jesus. He saved me. That's about all we have to know. I mean, in reality. Jesus healed the blind man. Look at this. So the Pharisees called the man who was blind after Jesus healed him, and he said, "Give God the glory. We know that this man," talking about Jesus, "is a sinner." Here's what the blind man said. "Well, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. I just know this. I was blind, and now I can see." That's it. It's so simple. So why don't we tell people about the most important thing in our life? It's hard. After the Joel event, I went to go get a massage, and I tried to tell the girl, like, she goes, "Why are you here?" And I'm like, "My back really hurts. I've been in heels, teach a Bible study, had a guest speaker," waiting for her to say, "Oh, you teach a Bible study, tell me about it." Nothing, blank, just stared at me. Okay, got the massage. Hopes that she would ask, handed her a card afterwards. Blank, nothing. And I want to just scream to her and say, "Do you not know that your eternal destination is at stake here?" But you know what? I don't. I'm scared, just like you. It's hard. It's not my most favorite thing to do. This is easy for me. But one-on-one, telling the Jehovah's Witness out front, I won't even touch that. That terrifies me. Sue's great at it. I'm more bad at it. So I want you to know, I get that. I'm in the same boat as you. It was so cute. The little girl, Christina, I was telling you about, she texted me the other day, and she goes, "Lisa, the coolest thing happened." She goes, "I'm at the mall." I don't know what store she was in. She goes, "These two girls are standing there, and I'm just standing there." And she said, they started talking about the show, The Bachelor. And she goes, they were like, "Do you watch The Bachelor?" And she turned around to them, and she goes, "No, but I watch women's Bible study. Here's a card, and here's a book." Okay. I was like, "Okay, you are my hero." Like, she turned The Bachelor into a way to witness to someone, okay? But she had everything with her, and I'm like, "You are awesome." But I want us to think about salvation is the most important thing and the most important thing we have to give to others. But you know what we do? We equate it with this. Oh, it's just kind of a religious thing. It's just kind of a side thing. It's a personal thing. No, it's not. It is the most valuable thing that you and I have, eternal life. The greatest showman doesn't get me to heaven. It just makes me sing for a couple hours. That's it. And I have no problem out there promoting that. I just think we don't think salvation is that big of a deal. Cheyenne was wearing a shirt one day, and I said, "I need a picture of that." It says, "Salvation is no small thing." Whatever fear Paul had for this salvation that is no small thing, Jesus said, "Don't stay silent. Say something. Give somebody a book." That's why we have all the pens. We have whatever. I'm not trying to promote Bible study. I'm trying to promote Jesus. Oh, I have to go. Hate this. All right. We have 1 minute. Not going to tell you my joke. That's gone. Okay. We'll read this really quick, long thing, and then we'll end. He continued there, so Paul stays. He apparently got bold again, and he stayed there a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. When Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul, brought him to the judgment seat, saying, "This fellow persuades men to worship God contrary to the law." Paul cannot get a break. When Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrongdoing or wicked crimes, O Jews, there would be a reason why I should bear with you. But if it's a question of words and names and your own law, look to it yourself, for I do not want to be a judge of such matters." He drove them from the judgment seat. Then all the Greeks took whatever that word says, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. But Gallio took no notice of these things, so Paul still remained a good while. Then he took leave of the brethren, sailed for Syria, and Priscilla and Aquila were with him, and he had his hair cut off, for he had taken a vow. And he came to Ephesus and left them there, and he himself entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to stay a little longer with them, he did not consent, but left them, saying, I must by all means keep this coming feast in Jerusalem, but I will again return to you, God willing. And he sailed from Ephesus. When he had landed at Caesarea and gone up and greeted the church, he went down to Antioch. After he had spent some time there, he departed and went over the region of Galatia, Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. Here's my point to this whole thing. What if Paul let his fear take over? What if he said, I'm just too fearful. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not traveling. I'm not telling people about Jesus. What if he stopped? We wouldn't have 13-ish books of the Bible that he wrote. We would never know Paul's story on how to push through fear and how to be faithful and continue. Here's the bottom line. You and I don't have to fear because of this. No matter what it is that you're fearful of, if it actually happens, he'll get you through it. He's not only in the boat with you, he's in your life if you know Jesus. He will provide. Some of you are terrified because you don't have the money for the bill. You don't have this. He's going to provide. I don't know how he does it. He just does. You pray, you seek, you trust him, and then he'll bring me home. If your problem that you're fearful about is sickness and dying, he's going to bring you home if you know him. And see, if you and I can look at life with those three things, then there is never, ever anything we will ever have to fear in our life again. And if you are here and you do not know Jesus, I'm telling you what, you're missing out on that. And that's the day you say, Jesus, come into my life. And go from the I once was blind and now I can see. Because salvation is no small thing. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you, God, for this lesson on fear that we see these great men of the Bible and the disciples, and they're just like us. And they're fearful and afraid of things, but God, they have turned their focus on you, and because of that, they're not afraid. I pray for every person here and every person watching us, however they found us, God, that we can get into this mode, that we say, you know what, I'm not going to fear because I have a great God who is with me no matter what I'm worried about. I pray for that for each person here that is sick, that is worried about something in their life. God, override them through your Spirit that they have nothing to be fearful about. Because in the end, we go home and we spend eternity with you. Things of this world are just not that big of a deal. Help us to get that in our brains and live a stress-free, fear-less life. In Jesus' name, amen.